Good morning, Class 7. Today we will finish the chapter The Mughal Empire. But before proceeding, we will see what we have studied in the previous two classes. So, we have talked about Mughals, and they were different from their predecessors who were a looting tribe. They said they came to India, they created their empire here, but initially it was felt that it will be for short time, but it was proved wrong. And then we have talked about their ancestors, that Mughals were descendant of two great lineages. From mother side they were from descendant of Genghis Khan, and from their father's side they were the successor of Timur. So obviously, both of them were, but they felt pride in calling as a successor of Timur. Then we have talked about the Mughals' military campaign, and you can see the pictures they have shown. Then we have talked about the different rulers, emperors. We have seen that Babur in 1526 he defeated Ibrahim Lodi. He was invited by his uncle Behlol Lodi. Although Behlol Lodi had the impression that he will come, he will defeat him, plunder the country, take loot it and leave it. But then his dreams were shattered. Babur came to India and he thought of setting up his empire here itself. Then we have talked about Humayun, who ruled from 1530 to 1540. Then there was a break because he was defeated by Sher Shah or Sher Khan, whom we popularly known as Sher Shah. And for like almost 15 years, Sher Shah ruled the country, followed by his in 15 years he himself has ruled. He couldn't live for long. Then his successors were there, but then they are not very important. And then again in 1555, Humayun was able to uh, get his empire back. Then he was succeeded by his son Akbar, who became the ruler at the age of just 13 years. So he was taken care by his regent Bairam Khan. Later on, Akbar sent him for on the pilgrimage, and he had to face the revolt of his half brother Mirza Hakim, then the Uzbeks. But then Akbar was very far sighted. Although Akbar was not a literate person, but then he was very far sighted, so he thought that if he has to rule India, where people of diverse culture and religion are living, then he has to do something to keep them happy as well. Then only he will be able to rule the empire peacefully. So he has adopted different policies to appease them. Then he was followed by Jahangir, who is also known as Prince Salim. And then Jahangir was taken after him. His son took over Shah Jahan. He ruled from 1627 to 1658. Shah Jahan is very famous. We all know him. He has built lot of monuments in our country which are still famous, and many people love to visit them. He was followed by Aurangzeb, who was now in Aurangzeb's regime. He changed lots of policies which were adopted by his father and his great grandfather. He was a very staunch Muslim, so lot of things he did again which was not liked by Hindus. And then he had ill-treated Shivaji, who was from Deccan, and because of that he has, you can say, insulted him. And Shivaji took revenge, and till the time he was alive he didn't let him rule peacefully. Then we have talked about the tradition of succession. Since Mughals had no succession pattern to be followed, so there used to be war after every king's death, or maybe when his children thought that now they can take over. And the famous war of succession was fought between Dara Shikoh Murad and Aurangzeb, in which Aurangzeb defeated everybody and he became the ruler. After that, he imprisoned his father, who was taken care till the time he was alive by his daughter Jahanara. Then Mughal relations with other rulers. This is what I was telling you, that with different rulers he had given them, like he had started matrimonial alliances in which he married the daughters of these Rajput princes, and that way, as and then gave them the designation in the Mughal court, where they were treated with respect. So these Rajputs were also appeased. They were also pleased by the behavior. We have talked about Mansabdars and Jagirdars. Mansab was a rank, and they were given particular land. From the revenue of that land was the salary of these Mansabdars. Zat was a you can say like it was a ranking. Different nobles have different ranks. So like 5,000 Zat. Then in Akbar's reign there were 29 Mansabdars with the Zat of 5,000, but Aurangzeb has increased the number of Mansabdars. So obviously the expenditure will also increase with the number of increase in the Mansabdars. We have talked about Zabt and Zamindari. That was the main source of income available to the Mughal rulers, and with the tax of the produce of the peasantry, the most of the places they paid taxes through the rural elites, and then the headman or the local chieftain. The Mughals used one term, zamindari, to describe it. Okay, so this is what we have to start today. Let's see. The main source of income available to Mughal rulers was tax on the produce of the peasantry. In most places, peasants paid taxes through the rural elites, that is, the headman or the local chieftain. The Mughals used one term, zamindars, to describe all intermediaries, whether they were local headmen of villages or powerful chieftain. So, the main source of income which was available to the ruler was the revenue collected by the produce from the peasantry, and that was collected by the local chieftain or headman, who was called as zamindar. Akbar's revenue minister Todarmal carried out a careful survey of crop yields, prices, and areas cultivated for a 10-year period, 1570 to 1580. On the basis of this data, tax was fixed on each crop in cash. Each province was divided into revenue circles with its own schedule of revenue rates for individual crops. This revenue system was known as Zabt. It was prevalent in those areas where Mughal administrator could survey the land. So, Todarmal is very famous for this work. What he did was he carefully observed surveyed the lands, and accordingly the tax was fixed for 10 years, that is from 1570 to 1580. Then on the basis of this data, the tax was collected in cash, not in kind. Then each province was divided into revenue circles, and accordingly revenue was fixed for each circle. And keep very careful accounts. This was not possible in provinces such as Gujarat and Bengal. In some areas, the zamindars exercised a great deal of power. The exploitation by Mughal zamindars could drive them to rebellion. Sometimes zamindars and peasants of the same caste allied in rebelling against Mughal authority. These peasant revolts challenged the stability of the Mughal Empire from the end of the 17th century. So what happened was that later these zamindars, since they had a lot of power, so when they were exploited, or sometimes these zamindars conspired with the peasants, if they belonged to the same caste, and they rebelled against the Mughal ruler. This was quite common in the end of the 17th century. Then Akbarnama and Aine Akbari. Akbar ordered one of his close friends and courtiers, Abul Fazl, to write a history of his reign. Abul Fazl wrote a 3-volume history of Akbar's reign, titled Akbarnama. The first volume dealt with Akbar's ancestors, and the second volume recorded the events of Akbar's reign. The third volume is the Aine Akbari. It dealt with Akbar's administration, household, army, the revenues, and the geography of his empire. It also provides rich details about the traditions and culture of the people living in India. The most interesting aspect about the Aine Akbari is its rich statistical details about things as diverse as crops, yields, prices, wages, and revenues. Okay, so Akbar had requested his one of his very close friend, who was also a courtier, Abul Fazl, to write the history, like write what was happening in his reign. So Abul Fazl wrote that in three parts and three volumes, that is known as Akbarnama. The first one, it was talked about the ancestors of Akbar. Second volume recorded the events which was happening in his reign. Third one, that is Aine Akbari, it dealt with Akbar's administration, his army, the way of collecting the revenue, the geographical condition of the empire. The most interesting aspect is its rich statistical details about things as diverse as crops, yields, prices, and revenues, etc. A closer look. Akbar's policies. The broad feature of administration were were laid by Akbar and were elaborately discussed by Abul Fazl in his book, the Akbarnama, in particular in its last volume, the Aine Akbari. Abul Fazl explained that the empire was divided into provinces called Subas, governed by a Subedar who carried out both political and military function. Each provinces had a financial officer or diwan. For the maintenance of peace and order in his province, the Subedar was supported by other officers. So we can say that in his book Aine Akbari, Abu al Fazl had explained the empire was divided into provinces. He has said that first one, the empire was divided into provinces called Suba. Suba was governed by Subedar, who carried out both political and military function. Then each province had a financial officer or diwan. So Suba was under Subedar. Then they had one financial officer or diwan for the maintenance of peace and order, like the police we have today. The Subedar was supported by other officers such as the military paymaster, that is Bakshi, the minister in charge of religious and charitable patronage, Sadr, military commander, Faujdars, and the town police commander, Kotwal. So these were there to help the ruler. Then let's see Noor Jahan's influence in Jahangir's court. Mehrunisa married the Emperor Jahangir in 1611 and received the title Noor Jahan. She remained extremely loyal and supportive to the monarch. As a mark of honor, Jahangir struck silver coins bearing his own title on one side, and on the other side, other inscriptions struck in the name of Queen Begum Noor Jahan. The adjoining document is an order of Noor Jahan. The square seal states, Command of Her Most Sublime and Elevated Majesty Noor Jahan Pacha Begum. The round seal states, by the son of Shah Jahangir, she became as brilliant as the moon. May Noor Jahan Pacha be the lady of the age. It is believed that Noor Jahan had lot of influence on Jahangir, and later on almost everything was done under her supervision. Akbar's nobles commanded large armies and had access to large amount of revenue. While they were loyal to the empire, functioned efficiently, but by the end of the 17th century, many nobles had built independent network. So, in even till the time Akbar was there, these nobles were loyal to the empire. But after his, by the end of the 17th century, these nobles rebelled against the ruler, and the loyalties to the empire was weakened by their own self-interest. While Akbar was at Fatehpur Sikri during the 1570, he started discussion on religion with ulemas, Brahmins, Jesuits, priests who were Roman Catholics and Zoroastrian. The discussion took place in Ibadat Khana. He was interested in the religion and social custom of different people. Akbar's interaction with people of different faith made him realize that the religious scholars who emphasized ritual and dogma were often bigots. Their teachings created division and disharmony amongst his subject. This eventually Okay, so led Akbar to the idea of Sulh-e-Kul. Before we will talk about this, I'll tell you that he had these meetings where people following different religion, these scholars, they came here, they had discussion, and then in that discussion, Akbar realized that these particular people were like you can say the dogmatic statements which they made were like authoritative, and they expected the people to follow whatever they have said. Then he has the bigots. They were like who were not very easy to adapt to the policies, religious things of other religion. So he got an idea of Sulh-e-Kul, that means universal peace. This idea of tolerance did not discriminate between people of different religion in his realm. Instead, it focused on system of ethics, honesty, justice, peace that was universally applicable. Abul Fazl helped Akbar in framing a vision of governance around this idea of Sulh-e-Kul. The principle of governance was followed by Jahangir and Shah Jahan as well. So Sulh-e-Kul, that is universal peace, which was continued by Jahangir and Shah Jahan. Sulh-e-Kul. Jahangir, Akbar's son, described his father's policy of Sulh-e-Kul in the following words: as in the wide expanse of divine compassion, there is room for all classes and the followers of all creeds. So, in his imperial dominion, which on all sides were limited only by the sea, there was room for the professors of opposite religions and for beliefs, good and bad, and the road to intolerance was closed. Sunnis and Shias met in one mosque and Christians and Jews in one church to pray. He consistently followed the principle of universal peace. So he has mentioned that because of Sulh-e-Kul, people it is said that Shia and Sunni, they cannot come together, and same ways with Christians and Jews, but till the time he was there, they came for together to the mosque and church respectively to pray. The Mughal Empire in the 17th century and after. The administrative and military efficiency of the Mughal Empire led to great economic and commercial prosperity. International travelers described it as the fabled land of wealth. But these same visitors were also appalled all the at the state of poverty that existed side by side with the greatest opulence. The inequalities were glaring. Documents from 20th century of Shah Jahan's reign inform us that the highest ranking Mansabdar were only 445 in number out of total 8,000. The small number, a mere 5.6% of the total number of Mansabdars, received 61.5% of the total estimated revenue of the empire as salaries for themselves and their troopers. The Mughal emperors and their Mansabdars spent a great deal of their income on salaries and goods. This expenditure benefited the artisans and peasants who supplied them with goods and produce. But the scale of revenue collection left very little for investment in the hands of the primary producer, the peasants and the artisan. The poorest among them lived from hand to mouth, and they could hardly consider investing in additional sources. So here we are talking about the administrative and military efficiency. So international travelers who came to India, they talked about that they presented as if it was a very rich country, but then when they visited, when they have seen the outskirts, the state of poverty was there, and the inequality could be seen. It was very clear. So the documents from 20th century of Shah Jahan's reign, it tell us that the highest ranking Mansabdar were only 445. We can say that lot of amount was spent on building these monuments. Then the Mughal emperor and their Mansabdars spent a great deal on salaries and goods. So these expenditure benefited the artisans and peasantry, but then the scale of revenue collection left very little for investment. The peasants and the artisans, the poorest among them, lived. The poor artisans and the peasants, they were only hand to mouth. They could earn that much only, which could help them to feed their family for their survival. They couldn't think of saving something. The poorest lived from hand to mouth and could hardly consider of investing in additional resources, tools and supplies to increase productivity. The wealthier peasantry and artisanal group, the merchant and bankers, profited in this economic world. The enormous wealth and resources commanded by the Mughal elite made them an extremely powerful group of people in the late 17th century. As the authority of the Mughal emperor slowly declined, his servants emerged as powerful center of power in the region. They constituted new dynasties and held command of provinces like Hyderabad and Awadh. Although they continued to recognize the Mughal emperor in Delhi as their master, by the 18th century, the provinces of the empire had consolidated their independent political identities. So, as I told you that last 25 years, Aurangzeb shifted to Deccan to keep a check or control it. So obviously, so when he shifted to Deccan, his control in Delhi or in the northern part, it was weakened. And then what happened that his, you can say, his slaves or people working under him, they declared themselves independent. Although independent in the sense they accepted the Mughal suzerainty, but they declared themselves to be the king. Then kings and queen. There were several great monarchs, all near contemporaries, in different parts of the world in 16th century. These included the ruler of Ottoman Turkey, Sultan Suleiman, 1520 to 1566. During his rule, the Ottoman state expanded into Europe, seizing Hungary and besieging Austria. His armies also seized Baghdad and Iraq, much of North Africa, all way into Morocco, acknowledged Ottoman authority. Suleiman also reconstructed the Ottoman navy. Its domination over the eastern Mediterranean brought the navy into competition with Spain. In the Arabian Sea, it challenged the Portuguese. The monarch was given the title of Al Khunani, the lawgiver, because of the large number of regulations Qunan passed during his reign. These were aimed to standardize administrative procedures throughout the expanding domain of the empire and specifically to protect the peasantry from forced labor and extraordinary taxes. Later, in the 17th century, when public order declined in Ottoman domain, the reign of Suleiman Kunani was remembered as a period of ideal governance. So simultaneously, these things were happening from 1520 to 1566. Sultan Suleiman of Ottoman Turkey, he captured lot of places. Then he was also, you can say, very lenient ruler, and he was given the title of Al Kunani, that is a person who gives lawgiver. And large regulations were, that is Kanun, were passed under his reign. And later on he was in the later 17th century, public order was declined, which was given by him, but people still remember Sulaiman Kunani. So that is all for today, class. Please do the question answers which I will be giving you today. Take care of yourselves. Be safe at home. Thank you.